Good morning, neighbor. It's the 4th of July and Canada Day holiday weekend, and against my better judgment, I planned a road trip to 2 national parks complete with an international border crossing and last-minute RV park reservation. No, I don't know what I was thinking either, but it didn't actually turn out as crowded as I feared. Mostly thanks to my well-informed strategy of staying up north in the Canadian Rockies, in Jasper National Park, with only a quick drive-by of Banff long enough to get a tank of gas and decide it was way too packed. I recommend skipping the summer drama in Banff and visiting in the winter instead. Anyway, I'm Allison, a tiny trailer traveler and not-so-tiny hobby farm hopeful, and Jasper has a special place in my heart. It has everything I love about my home in Washington, just with the volume turned up to like 11. It's one of those places I'm always down to visit again and again, even go out of my way to visit, 10 hours each way, on a holiday weekend. Jasper National Park is the largest of the Canadian national parks, and it's the world's second largest dark sky preserve. That means minimal light pollution for premium stargazing. That is, when it's not cloudy. It's also my favorite of the 7 national parks that make up the Canadian Rocky Mountain Parks World Heritage Site. Goodness, that's a mouthful. Its 615 miles of hiking trails are infinitely explorable and super challenging. Its wildlife viewing is matched by just a couple other national parks in the world, and in my personal experience, it's one of the least crowded of all of them. I'm personally a fan of the Canadian National Parks fire and drinking curfews that make the campgrounds here a lot quieter. Unlike me, though, you'll want to book months in advance if you want a campsite in the high season. I just happened to luck out and found a tiny site in a KOA outside the park at the last minute. In fact, this particular KOA was the site of an Airstream Travel Club outing, which was kind of fun to experience. Chances are good here you'll see big game like caribou, elk, moose, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, bears, and wolves. Bears are especially active with their young around the park, and we saw a sow with 3 little black bear babies running into the woods off the highway, with folks with cameras in hot pursuit, which is really not something I recommend. Aside from a quick stay years ago at Banff National Park Campground and hiking up to Lake Louise, the Valley of 5 Lakes hike is probably the busiest place I've been in the Canadian Rockies. And I have to say it really wasn't that crowded early in the morning, even for a holiday weekend. There's a couple bottlenecks on the trail and a few popular viewpoints where people congregate, but it's no worse, really, than your average weekend trail in the North Cascades. And I can't really blame the crowd. This hike is pretty easy at 3 miles and delivers exactly what the label says. 5 lakes, all helpfully numbered with signage along the way. It doesn't really matter which direction you do the loop, but Lakes 3 and 4 are considered the highlights, so I suppose it just comes down to which way puts you facing the sun or something. Or it might just come down to competition for the trail of the 4-legged variety. The mild microclimate of the lake valleys present prime growing conditions for wild berries, which also attract a lot of bears in the months of July and August. So maybe turn around and do the loop in the other direction if you find the trail occupied by a hungry grizzly or moose mama. And I don't really recommend going off trail at all to enjoy a trailside snack yourself. The brush is really thick and it's way too easy to surprise a fellow forager. Aside from the predatory hazards, this trail is overall really safe and really popular with families. Give yourself a lot of time to just stop and smell the wild roses. Just kidding, those don't really smell like anything.
Oh man, yeah, I don't want to go in that far.
My favorite lazy downtime activity in Jasper, especially when the weather's hot, involves wading the shallow Jasper Lake, an especially wide part of the Athabasca River. The Athabasca River originates at the Columbia Ice Field, a 125 square mile, nearly 2,000 foot deep glacier field at the very northern tip of Banff and southern border of Jasper. And it's been receding since roughly the emergence of Homo sapiens. One of its discoverers, Norman Colley, wrote about it, quote, "The view that lay before us in the evening light was one that does not often fall to the lot of modern mountaineers. A new world was spread at our feet. To the westward stretched a vast ice field, probably never before seen by the human eye, and surrounded by entirely unknown, unnamed, and unclimbed peaks." And thus began climbing fever in the Canadian Rockies, a tradition that has not ended since this discovery in 1898. The ice field is, very importantly, atop a triple continental divide, its waters flowing ultimately north to the Arctic Ocean, east to the North Atlantic Ocean, and south and west to the Pacific Ocean. The Athabasca River itself empties 750 miles north in Lake Athabasca. That's in Upper Saskatchewan, about 15 hours away, so we're gonna have to skip seeing that one until later. But we can visit Athabasca Falls, which is more like a 45-minute drive from our campsite. As I mentioned earlier, Jasper is one of 7 parks in the Canadian Rocky Mountain Parks World Heritage Site, that thing that takes really long to say. It's been declared a World Heritage Site both to preserve the landscape being shaped by nature for the past hundreds of millions of years, and its fossil sites. Yes, there's dinosaurs in here. Well, maybe not a T-Rex or anything, but the fossils found here are actually way older than that. It's home of the best fossil record humans have discovered from what is known as the Cambrian explosion, a time when life had yet to leave the ocean about 540 million years ago, but experienced a sudden rapid evolution for reasons yet to be determined. The rock these critters are preserved in is unique in its ability to preserve what the soft parts of the animal looked like, making them especially detailed and informative. The Burgess Shale was discovered by paleontologist Charles Walcott in the summer of 1909, a particularly seasonable time to visit the Canadian Rockies. He then returned to the quarry almost every year until 1924, collecting more than 65,000 specimens by the ripe old age of 74. But we'll get back to Charles Walcott and his shale creatures in a bit. Roche A Perdrix, pardon my French, is, in my opinion, the quickest and most satisfying way to get a great view in Jasper. The trailhead is just off the highway and overlooks the Athabasca River and Jasper Lake. The elevation gain is fast and the views develop quickly. That makes it an ideal place to catch a sunset or see some morning wildlife. And you don't have to go all the way up the mountain to enjoy the fruits of your labor. The summit will set you back, or up, 3,800 feet in less than 2 miles up. But just stop and turn around almost any time and you'll probably be plenty satisfied with what you were able to see. In fact, what you're seeing probably holds a lot of secrets we'll never know. Back to the Burgess Shale for a second. It wasn't until the 1960s that people started to understand just what a find the Burgess Shale's discoverer, Charles Walcott, had on his hands. On further inspection of the shale and his finds, scientists found bizarre-looking animals with only scant resemblance of any known animals today. Take Opabinia, with 5 eyes and a snout like a vacuum cleaner. Or how about Hallucigenia, which appears to have walked on its spines? The Burgess Shale to this day still produces more creatures than scientists have time to study. It was made a heritage site in 1980, and the rest of the 7 Canadian Rocky Mountain parks were designated part of the World Heritage Site 4 years later. And scientists have found new shale fossil sites as recently as 2012. As we gained elevation slowly but steadily, we paid attention to the sky, which was developing a disturbing dark gray color, and thunder started to echo through the river valley. In addition to the overhead concerns, the final scramble to the peak isn't really fit for doggy feet, so we took our winds in a few more times on the way back down, enjoying the view, and called it a day. And to kind of wrap this up, I have a couple other favorite places in the park I've visited from years past. The Beaver Lake Trail is one of my favorite casual little trails with a ton of views and wildflowers packed into a 2.5-mile round trip. It's pretty flat, and I found it a nice stroll at a lower elevation one summer years ago when temperatures were over 90 degrees in August. I think I appreciated the swim more than Isis did, though. You can get a lot of good hiking and some pretty rad waterfalls out of Ogre Canyon, but those miles aren't going to give themselves up easily, and that's why I like it. That's not really because the trail is all that challenging, it's the road. Even in July, there was several feet of standing water in some places and mud holes that presented a challenge to even a well-equipped vehicle. So take that one on only if you're feeling extra spicy and have a bit of extra time to crawl through the mud. But whether you use it to enter or exit this ancient oasis in the middle of nowhere, use the Icefields Parkway if you can at least once. It's one of not very many accessible places left in the world to see glaciers this close, and it is just a really cool drive. So thanks for joining me on this Canada Day jaunt to Jasper. If you're like me and like to stay away from and above it all, you'll probably enjoy this trip as much as Isis and I did.